peace like a river attendeth my way. When sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to his cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my
Oh, thank you, Lorelei. What a gift that was. Thank you for that gift, and may that song and the message of the song be a blessing to you wherever you are today. I'm Dan Smith, senior pastor at the Garden Grove Church down in Orange County, and this is Flame of Truth. We're doing a series called Yea God. When I did it in my church, of course, every time we did another trait of God, we would shout and say, Yea God, for His power, His freedom, and today, Yea God, for being a refuge. I was driving up California, years ago. I think I was, I don't know where I was pastoring at the time, but I was on my way up to Oregon. And I wanted to see a friend of mine who was a youth pastor at a big church there in Sacramento. I still do not know what I did to offend this person. Maybe I cut him off or I lost him in my blind spot. But somehow I made a young man mad who he and his girlfriend were in a little pickup truck. So they were up right behind me. So I slowed down that they could go. They passed me. Then they slowed down till we were practically stopped. So I finally went around and they were right on me again. So I've made this man mad. Well, it came time to go off on my exit to the church, kind of a two-lane exit. They followed me. We got to the end, and here was a long line of cars before the stop sign. I stopped, my right spot. This guy jumps out of his truck and begins to run towards me. I had a good car right then. I was young and single at the time and had a little good car. So I just didn't know what else to do. I pulled around to the right of all those cars into the dirt and just floored it. I didn't know what I was going to find at the front. I didn't know if I would come up to a culvert or a cement block or what, but I was going to at least do what I could. And I got up to the front, and there was enough room for me to just sneak by the stop sign and go. My heart's pounding. I don't know how far he was running, but I could see him finally, he gave up, realized he couldn't keep up with me, and went back to his truck. I just went. I didn't care where I went. I just turned right and left until I was lost, hoping I was lost, he wouldn't be able to find me. My heart's just pounding, scared to death. Finally, I wandered back and got to a main cross street and found my way back to the church. And I have never gotten over that exit or the feelings when I've been to that church since then. I actually had the call to pastor that church a few years ago. But I'll never forget that afternoon, the feeling of someone's footsteps running after you. And that's the background of this passage where I'm not going to have time to read all of this because it's 2 chapters, Joshua 20 and 21. And actually, the beginnings of this are in Numbers 35 and in Deuteronomy. But the actual implementation of these cities of refuge is in Joshua 20 and 21. And if you've known the Bible, you know that they had this plan. In the Middle East, there is this blood avenging. Someone kills someone in your family, you have the right and you are honor bound to get your family together, and you chose the fastest runner, and you say, you're the blood avenger, and you had a right to go after the one who killed your family member and kill them. It's okay. You have to do it. Well, that was the law. But what if it was an accidental murder? Axe head flies off, something happened. It wasn't your fault. You didn't mean to do it. Then they had a plan with these cities of refuge. They made 6 cities. They were all about a half a day of running away so that no one would be farther than half a day. You could run a half a day, and if you could get into that city before someone could catch you, you were safe. And so they had these trails to the cities of refuge. Once a year, the whole country would come out and clear those trails. They had signs, cities of refuge. And you would come out and help because who knew when you might be the one. And so if all of a sudden you accidentally, typically if we had a car accident, didn't mean to, you would just take off running and hope that you could beat the blood avenger to the city. The moment you walked inside the city gates, you were safe. And you would call for the city elders, and you would find a way to have a trial and try to defend yourself and prove that it was an accident. And you could live there in the city of refuge until the high priest died. And then you were free to go back to your home. Cities of refuge. Yea, God, for being a refuge. And so God is a refuge. This is God's idea. God is a God of refuge. It was in His nature, in His core being, is that if you're in trouble, you can come to God. These cities of refuge were microcosms, a metaphor for God Himself, a God that you can run to. When you hear footsteps running behind you, you can go to God. Whatever is going on in your life, if you hear footsteps, if people are running after you, if finances are running after you, whatever it is that's coming after you, and you can hear the footsteps, you can go to God, and God will be a refuge for you. Psalm 91, verse 4, under His wings you will find refuge. Matthew 23, 37, when Jesus looked out over Jerusalem, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often, like a mother hen with her chicks, I wanted to bring you under the wings, but you would not. That's a metaphor for God, the God who is a refuge. My wife is Hilda, and it's one of her great gifts, is that if I'm hurting or I'm in trouble, if I'll go to her, she's a refuge. There was a day, I think we were still dating. I was a pastor in Newbury Park Church up here in a high school. And for my doctoral dissertation, I was having people evaluate sermons. Now, they evaluate them informally all the time, but now I was having them formally. Every week, fill out a form. You know, was it clear? Was it this? And was it that? Did it respond to a particular need that you had? So I would walk out of the door and be out there greeting at the door. They would all be inside filling out this form. It's part of my doctorate, but after 2 weeks, I couldn't cope with it anymore. There was one week where at 8:30 Saturday morning, I didn't have a sermon on paper yet. I had studied all week. It was a good sermon, really, I think. But I couldn't put it down on paper. For years, as a young pastor, I was ready to preach. I had worked on this sermon all week. I knew that the church needed to hear this message I had. And all of a sudden, I couldn't put it down on paper. I got through that sermon. But about 10 minutes before I was done, I just lost confidence in it. I shook hands, and I was destroyed. I was devastated. And if someone had offered me a job for equal pay, I'd have been out of there. I needed a refuge. Hilda came over. She was up visiting that day from Glendale. And we went into our living room at my house, which she eventually moved into. And we were supposed to be at someone's house for dinner. And I just couldn't. And I laid down with my head in her lap, and she was a refuge. And our boys growing up for years, whenever they were sad, would run to Mom. Mom was a refuge. It's one of the more feminine qualities. Sometimes we talk about the masculine and feminine qualities of God. God of power, and a God who is a refuge. So what does refuge feel like? When you can hear the footsteps coming and you go to refuge. I spent a week one time doing canoeing up in British Columbia. I was a young youth pastor years ago. Some of my fathers and their teenage boys wanted to go where you carry your boat portage over the mountain and then you paddle. Bull Run Preserve up in British Columbia. One of the fathers had 2 sons, and so they took me to be the other one in the boat years ago. These young boys are now almost 50 years old themselves. But we had a great time. But it rained almost the whole time, and I went up there sick. You paddle a canoe, and then you had to carry the canoe in the rain and the mud up over this mountain and down. Canoe was upside down. Your head would be inside. You'd bang into a tree, rattle around. You'd slip and slide. Then you would have to climb back over that mountain and grab your pack. So every mile and a half was really 4.5 miles. It was tough. And then it began to rain. And we would just be soaked to the bone. I can remember one day we saw a little cabin, smoke coming out, and we headed for that cabin. And when we got to that cabin, we walked in. It was jam-packed with people. Everyone had come to that cabin. Why? Because it was a refuge out of the rain and the storm. The final day, we were supposed to spend the whole weekend out there. We finally said, let's get out of here. And we paddled the last 20 miles, and we got into our car, and we went to a hotel. We wanted a refuge. A refuge. I used to go rafting in Oregon, and I would go in my little torpedo boat, they call it a little kayak. And one time I dumped out, and while I was in the water, I swallowed a lot of water, and I'm going through rapids, trying to hold on to my boat and my paddle. And I was struggling, and I lost the boat for a while. I was just in the water. I had a life jacket, but in the rapids and swallowing water. And someone saw that I was struggling. I couldn't get out of the stream and over to the shore. And someone said, maybe you ought to get into the boat. Maybe you ought to get into the boat. And so I really didn't want to. I wanted to do this whole trip by myself. But I got into the boat. I needed a refuge. And that's what God feels like, a refuge, a sanctuary, someone you can go to who has power, who will comfort you, who will be there for you, who says, lo, I am with you always. I will never leave you. A hiding place, a shelter where you're safe from the footsteps that are coming after you. Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Well, who needs a refuge? Who doesn't need one? It may be pressure at school. I was a pastor on a campus for a long time. The pressure, tests. My sons are in school now. And there's tests and there's papers and pressure. And once in a while, you want a refuge, just a break. Maybe finances. I've had 3 or 4 people that I've known well who were about ready to lose their house, a couple more right now. People scared of losing their job, or people who have lost their job. Talked to one this week. I was at a party Sunday, went up to her, how are you doing? Lost her job. Had an accident on an escalator. Lost her job, trying to find another job. Single, alone, needs a refuge. All kinds of reasons and ways people want a refuge. What are you going to do? Psalm 9, verse 9, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And we say, yea, God, for being a refuge. How do you get into this refuge? Back then they could run to the city. But how do you get to God? How do you somehow enter God as a city of refuge and a place of refuge? The first step is the big one that you have to call out. Psalm 91, verse 15, he will call upon me and I will answer. I will be with him in trouble. It's that calling out that is so hard for us, because it means you have to admit that you are dependent and not independent. I don't want to get into that raft. I wanted to do it myself and go the whole road. I want to be able to come back and say, yeah, I made it. I want to admit I had to get into the raft. The whole idea of I will call out has to admit that I've got footsteps running after me. I need something that I can't handle by myself. There's 3 decisions you have to make. One decision is I can't stay where I am. The moment they had that accident or whatever it was, I can't stay here. I've got to go. Can't stay where you are and still be in the cities of refuge. You can't stay where you are and still have God be refuge. You have to go to God. Go to the city of refuge. Number 2, you can't wait. You couldn't wait. If you waited to give that chance for that blood avenger to catch up to you, you could have the footsteps run and catch you. You can't wait. You got to go. My uncle, Maury Venden, has always told a story. He was at pastor of one of our colleges. Talking about a young girl who felt her need for God, came to see him in the pastoral office. And she wanted to give her life to Christ. And he said, you want to step over the line? You want to give your life to Christ? Right now. You can do it right now. You can have God as your refuge right now. She said, no, I've got some plans for the weekend. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe Monday. Turns out she was having an affair with a married man. And she didn't want to cut that off yet. Wanted one more weekend with him. Then she would come to Christ. Taking a chance. Can't wait. Go to the city of refuge. And number 3, you can't stop running. Sometimes people run, but they don't stop at the city of refuge. They keep on running. And the rest of their lives are looking back. And maybe I've told before the story about the prisoner of war during the World War II, came over here to the States. escaped from the prison camp. Got married. He would work somewhere, and then he'd run. Work for a while, and then run. He was working, I think, as a ski instructor one time. And all of a sudden, there was a disaster and an avalanche, and he had to help rescue people. And his picture ended up in the newspaper. He came back to her at the house. He said, "We got to go, pack up. Why are we always running?" And he finally told her, I was a prisoner of war from Germany. I escaped. I'm always afraid that they're going to catch me, put me back in jail." She says, "Honey, this war is over 20 years ago. I'm sure that you're free now." They went to the authorities. His name had been taken off the list 20 years ago. 20 years of looking over the shoulder, 20 years of running. And some people never stop running. They're always driven by the footsteps, running after them. And there comes a time you have to stop running and go to the city of refuge and go to God and say, "I'm not going to run anymore." And live within the grace and refuge that is God. No more. And then you have to pour out your heart and soul. Psalm 62, verse 8. Pour out your hearts to Him because God is a refuge. There comes a time you have to just say to God, "Here's where I'm at. Here's the footsteps I hear running after me." And just say it. Here's the pressure I'm feeling. Financial pressure, family pressure, work pressure, school pressure, physical pressure, some test is coming. And just say, "God, I need a refuge." You have to pour out your heart and soul. And then comes the final question. How does God give us refuge? How do you actually experience God as a God of refuge in your life? And I just want to be very clear. You can do this on your own. Yes, there are times to go to a small group. And I've had groups gather around me and give me refuge, yes. There are times when you can go to a counselor, and I've gone to a counselor many times. Just say, I need someone to be on my side. I need someone to listen to me and give me a refuge and give me a hug. Lady stood up this week. I was in the hospital visiting someone. She says, "I need a hug. Can you give me a hug?" But there are times when you have to do this by yourself. 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, it says, Samuel strengthened himself in the Lord. David came into that little village, and the Philistines had come, and they had destroyed the village. All the wives and women and children were gone, and now the place was on fire, and his own soldiers were tired of running. And he said, "You are the one responsible for this." And he picked up stones to stone him. It was tough. And it said David strengthened himself in the Lord because there was no one else. And there can be times when you have no family to go to. They're not there for you. There's no counselor, no small group, maybe not even a church community. And you have to just go to God Himself alone. I had an experience one time in my church, Oregon, years and years ago. I was telling someone this the other day. There was a big battle in my church over well witching. And we had someone who could witch wells, and someone said, "No, that's wrong. Let's not do that." We needed water. Our well was dry at the church. And so one of my members said, came on Saturday morning, and she had got someone else to witch our property, and they had put stakes everywhere where they thought there would be a well. Some of my elders got mad. "You weren't supposed to do that. We said we would just pray. We wouldn't trust in well witchers." So he went out and he kicked all those stakes over. Well, that made everyone mad too. I'm 25, 26 years old. This is hard. And that man who kicked over all those stakes came to me and wanted me to defend him as an elder in the church, that he did what was right. I didn't know to say that. Is that what we should do? Go kick something over? We had a potluck. He was at the potluck. And because I would not just blanketly approve what he did, he got mad at me. He just shouted and yelled at me in front of a whole group. They all scattered as this man just red-faced yelled at me. "You're not a Christian. You're not of God." Difficult. That night, another 2-3 of us were going to go play Bugler's Holiday in a concert. And at the end of that trumpet trio, the first trumpet was a pastor, just destroyed it. Just could not hit the notes. It was a disaster. And we had to walk away from that concert. Embarrassed. I don't think I've ever seen that pastor since then. So embarrassing. I was destroyed. I drove down that road back to my house. I went up to every home where there was a church member. I needed a refuge. I needed someone to say that I was okay and that I was still valuable and to be a refuge to me. And I couldn't find a single person home. And I finally had to go into my house. I was single, alone, and somehow find refuge in God himself. David strengthened himself in the Lord. And there's a time where God will be that. I got a letter from someone a while ago, been an Adventist in my tradition, but he said, Dan, I have a weary Adventist soul. He had been so abused by the system and boring church services and by the rules and politics. He left the church for years, was trying to come back. He said, Dan, someday we need to have a party at the church for all the prodigals who have left, who just couldn't make it in church anymore, and we need to make them a place of refuge. And I said, let's do it. What do we have to do to have a party? So that everybody who's been beat up, who feels footsteps running after them, the church has got to be a place of refuge where people can have a sanctuary and be safe and feel refuge from God. One of these days we're going to walk into the gates of heaven, and heaven is going to be the ultimate refuge. We walk in the gates. The moment you walk through the gates, you will be safe. There will be no more footsteps, no more accuser of the brethren, no more pressure, no more stress, no more bills, no more cancer, no more death. And it'll be a place of refuge forever because our God is a God of refuge. And we will stand every week and come to worship him, and we will say, yea, God, for being a refuge. God bless you all.